reminding her that everything has changed this year because of COVID, and it just still seems surreal when I come in here and I see all these red uh, tags that say "Do not sit." Or so. Thank you for your thoughtfulness and your concern for the public safety of others. Our campus has done a phenomenal job looking out for each other since last March, and I am so proud. And thank you for being thoughtful today and allowing us to have to accommodate. I hope and pray this is the last time we have to gather together for this lectureship like this. We look forward to better days. I keep thinking that the promise of spring and the warmth and the new life it brings is just going to carry over, and we're going to have a grand celebration around the 4th of July because we're going to be in a much better place. But for today, thank you for being safe. Thank you for having your mask on. Watch your distance. Wash your hands. So. If we haven't met, and most of us have, I am Steve Turner, president of Northeastern State University. On behalf of the entire NSU family, it's my pleasure to welcome you. We do have some guests today. First, I always like to introduce my wife, Penny, if she would raise her hand. Yeah. We're going to say a lot about the author, but she also has someone that really has stole the show in the book. Just a phenomenal part of the book that really gives it life. But Jazz Barnett's back here. Jasmine, welcome, and thank you for being with us. We've had a great time with Jazz and Brittany, and feel like we've known them. So I know. Thank you for being a good sport, and or as your sister would say, free spirited. So we're so glad that you're both here, and more will be said. Uh, I'm going to say a little bit about the program, and then there'll be a few more introductions. But some of you have heard of the great philosopher, the famous Clarence Odbody. Who knows anything about Clarence Odbody? One person. Clarence Odbody wrote a message in the front cover of a book that was called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And the message that he wrote was, "Dear George, remember, no man is a failure who has friends." No man is a failure who has friends. And then he went on to say, "Thanks for the wings. Love, Clarence." Now perhaps you know who Clarence Odbody was. He was the somewhat mishap guardian angel for George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. But the whole story there is what a difference that one person can make in the lives of their friends and the lives of the community. It's a great story. And I think there's some wonderful parallels for us today, because to have friends, you have to be a friend. And Larry Adair is a friend to many. In fact, the Larry Adair lectureship was established in 2004 by a group of his engaged family and friends as a way to support and recognize his many years of public service. And that's important. Remember what Clarence said, no man's a failure who has friends. The goal was to provide a forum to discuss politics, governance, social issues, public policy. And certainly this has become the premier NSU lectureship. Larry Adair was the Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives from 2001 to 2005 in the 48th and 49th legislative sessions. He served a total of 22 years in the House. While Larry spent much of his life leading the efforts to pass laws that created fairness in the justice system, Brittany Barnett has dedicated her life to help those who were not treated fairly in the justice system. So the two of you have something in common, but at different points of entry into the justice system. Larry understands what it means to be sacrificial because he's a veteran. He served in the United States Army doing a tour in Vietnam. He's a teacher, principal, superintendent. He's a kind man with a teacher's heart. We're thankful for his continued service also as a member of the NSU family. Glad that he is with us today, and Jan. So Larry, if you two would just wave and say thank you. We're so glad you're here. Some other noteworthy folks and you're all important to us today, but we have the Larry Adair Lecture Scholars. Okay. Lauren, raise your hand. Lauren Cole, yeah. Cameron James, welcome. Jordan Presley and Jaden Ingram. We have also with us all the way from Okmulgee, Oklahoma, Muskogee Creek Capital. We have Fred and Carolyn Burks. Fred is on our foundation board and alum, so welcome to both of you. We have the 4 vice presidents that make up the cabinet that really, and let me just say, folks, they've had a very tough job. A tough job got worse with COVID, and then it got slammed with Siberian weather last week. So these folks have been working night and day, days straight. So I just want to say thanks to them. But Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Debbie Landry over here. We have Christy Lansall, VP of Administration and Finance. Dan Mayberry, VP of University Relations. And last but not least, Jared Freeman, Vice President for Student Affairs. So again, thank you to each of you for what you've done to help keep us safe and open and responding to 14 pipe bursts that were brought on by the 30 below. A week ago today, it was 14 degrees below with wind chills at 30 degrees below. And yesterday it was 74. So, right? Only in Oklahoma, but we're again, thank you for being here. You have, there are different ways to submit questions. So I think that you've seen that displayed up here. We have students and others that have gloves on that can take something from you. And so nothing's changed. So is there another opportunity, Peggy, to submit questions or not? Oh, it's up here. Okay, never mind. All right. So the other thing I need to say is we are live streaming this out to those, again, because of the capacity limits that we have. It is being live streamed. And again, to those of you that are watching it from home, thank you from your computer, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. There will not be a formal per se book signing out front. There are several books that have already been signed by the author. And we didn't know that, but today at Northeastern State was her first official book signing event. So way to go, NSU. And Brittany, thank you. So again, we're glad that you're here. We'll move on with the program now. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lauren Cole, our 2018 Larry Adair Scholar, who will be graduating in May. And Lauren will be introducing our speakers. And one last thing, I believe we were talking about this, Peggy. This is the 10th year for the scholarship piece to the lectureship that started in 2004. So anytime that friends and donors give to touch the life of a student, that's also worthy of recognition. So Larry, thank you for that. Lauren Cole, thank you.
Oh, there I am. All right. We are so excited today to host a conversation with Brittany K. Barnett, moderated by NSU's Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Debbie Landry. Dr. Landry is a native Oklahoman raised in Claremore who graduated from the University of the State of New York while serving as a United States Marine Corps, or yes, United States Marine Corps. She also earned 2 master's degrees and attended OSU for her doctorate in education. Dr. Landry retired as a major from the Marine Corps after 20 years of active service across the world and began teaching at a public school in Owasso, Oklahoma, in early childhood education. So yes, Dr. Landry went from the Marines to teaching kindergarten, and only she knows which one is tougher. In 2004, Dr. Landry joined NSU as an assistant professor and then became the department chair for the curriculum program and instruction in NSU's College of Education. In 2012, she was selected as the dean of that college, and in July 2017, Dr. Landry began serving as provost and vice president of academic affairs. Please welcome Dr. Debbie Landry. Our guest speaker, Brittany K. Barnett, is an award-winning attorney and entrepreneur who is helping transform the criminal justice system by securing the freedom of clients who were serving life sentences for federal drug offenses. Inspired by her own experience as a daughter of a formerly incarcerated mother, Ms. Barnett has also founded 2 nonprofits, the Buried Alive Project, which is helping dismantle life without parole sentences, and the Girls Embracing Mothers, which empowers girls with mothers behind bars. Ms. Barnett's memoir, A Knock at Midnight, A Story of Hope, Justice, and Freedom, was released last fall as Amazon's debut featured book. The book tells of her transformation from a career in accounting to corporate law and then to pro bono work to free clients who were sentenced under a federal mandatory minimum standards to long sentences, often without the hope of parole for drug convictions. Please join me in welcoming Brittany K. Barnett.
Although I could probably, oh, there, so I could find my teacher voice fairly easily if I needed to, but thank you all for being here, and thank you, Brittany. It's such an honor and pleasure to meet you and to have this conversation this afternoon, and I'll join in with everyone in saying, I loved your book. I couldn't put it down, but actually I started with the audio book. I told her earlier, I had to pull off the road a couple of times. I just go, what? It's just so unbelievable. And I feel so strongly about sharing the book with others that I wanted to also have a hard copy of it. So thank you for signing it. And I encourage you, if you don't have a copy, to do that. But let's talk about that book. You started the book sharing your own experiences with your family growing up, and also the effects of addiction and incarceration on those that you loved and cared about within your life. Why did you think that was important to share with all of us?
You know, when I first got the idea to write the book, I was not going to talk about my childhood. And really wasn't sure if it was something people would even be interested in or want to read. But the publishers encouraged me to do so. And I'm glad that I did, because it is an issue of addiction that impacts many more of us than we would ever know. And it brings a common ground to this issue of addiction that is really a moral crisis and a public health issue. And so I'm glad that I did have the courage somewhere, you know, to tell that challenging experience.
Well, I appreciate that you did. And through those first few chapters, you talk about some role models in your life. I mean, some are family. You want to maybe share a few of those that really help guide you in your life during those early days?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my mom was one, you know, even though my mom suffered from a drug addiction, she didn't always. And she was a nurse, very loving and caring. And even through it all, my sister Jazz and I knew that we were loved. And through the relationship with my mom and just being from a large extended family, I wanted to ensure that we showed that love, that I showed the love through the book, and showing that pain and joy can coexist and that we are complex, nuanced people. And so I would start there. And of course, my dad and my dad is just a remarkable human being. My parents were very young, teenagers when I was born. My dad is very poetic and he would always write me poems growing up and just pouring into me of how I could accomplish anything I set my mind to, and to always just keep and put God first and go after my heart's desires. And of course, it was annoying at 15, reading my dad's heart and soul poured out on the page. But somewhere I found the wherewithal to hold on to those poems, and I still have them to this day. And definitely my grandfather. I had so many words of wisdom from him. Growing up in the South, I mean, we have our own language, but he really did. And just one of the biggest pieces of advice he gave me was we were fishing one day. They had a pond in front of their home. And I was a teenager and venting my teenage woes to him, complaining about something. And he listened to me so intently. And I just remember him hearing me out. And he said, "It ain't nothing but a step for a step, a big girl. You just got to keep on stepping." And I still carry that with me when times are challenging. Even the past year, we've all experienced so much with COVID and public murder of George Floyd and just other social justice issues. And as daunting as it may seem, we have to keep on stepping. And so my family was a huge source of inspiration for me. And then I definitely had some mentors along the way in college, that people you don't really realize are mentors at the time, but they're leading and guiding you in a way that is very influential and divine.
Did you start on the track to become a lawyer early, or did you have another calling? I think you talked about it in the book a little. I mean,
Yes, as cliche as it sounds, I did always want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable from the Cosby Show. And unfortunately, in my small piece of rural East Texas, there were very little lawyers, very few lawyers, and there certainly weren't any lawyers who looked like me. And so I really started to think that becoming a lawyer was out of my league. In hindsight, I realized it's because I didn't know any, and representation and proximity is so important. But I was always good at math, and I said, well, I read a book in high school, a B.B. Moore Campbell book called Brothers and Sisters, and the protagonist in the book worked at a bank. And she was a Black woman and very successful. And I said, okay, I'm gonna work at a bank. And I went to college and majored in finance at the University of Texas at Arlington. And a mentor, who was a dear friend of mine, he took me to lunch and he said, "Brittany, you should switch your major to accounting." And I said, "Why?" I didn't like much to be told what to do, and I'm like, why? Like, why should I switch my major? But he said, with an accounting degree is 360. You can do finance work with an accounting degree, but it may be a little harder for you to do accounting work with a finance degree. And so I switched to accounting, and I got a bachelor's and master's in accounting, became a certified public accountant, and went on to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers and an auditor. But it was something about that dream of becoming a lawyer. It was always just on the fringe of my vision. And one day I was working in downtown Dallas, and the law firm Baker Botts, it's a big international firm, was in the same building as Pricewaterhouse. And I went on their website, and one thing I love about law firm websites is they show the pictures and the bios. And the first Black woman lawyer I saw was Krista Brown Sanford. And I sent her a random email. I told her that I worked in her building and that I had this dream of going to law school. And I asked her if she would meet me downstairs at the Starbucks for some advice. And she responded almost right away. And she met me at that Starbucks, a stranger, but Krista took my hand and she has not let it go since. And that was almost 15 years ago.
Mentors are huge. I know we implemented
Huge.
a model here, faculty mentors, just to help with listening more than anything. I'm so glad you had to do the reaching out, that someone listened
Yes.
and helped you.
It's critical. It's critical.
You sure had a track as far as the accounting and all of that was wonderful, but you did go ahead and make that shift and were admitted to law school. Here at NSU, we like to say we faculty make a difference, and they do, and they're remembered many years later. Is there a faculty perhaps at law school? I remember when I read the book that I thought, oh, wow, that person
Yes.
really seemed to have stood out to you. Was that the case? Did you have a faculty that kind of set a challenge for you that you heard later, maybe from a class or?
Yes, absolutely. And it was something that it changed my life forever. I went to SMU, Devon School of Law, and I took a critical race theory class. And I was a CPA. I had studied for the rigorous CPA exam in Texas, and I knew I was going to practice corporate law. It was a natural gravitation for the work I had done at Price Waterhouse. And so I was kind of cruising through law school. I took an elective in criminal justice and came across this critical race theory course that analyzed the intersection between race and the law. And I was going to write my paper about disproportionate sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine. And Professor David Lacey was just an amazing soul who taught this class in a way that was intimate, thought-provoking, and challenged all of our beliefs. And his leadership in that course was just phenomenal. You know, the course was life-changing for me, and really learning just how our nation's laws bleed with racial injustice. You know, I think it's a fact that is beyond legitimate debate at this point. But I learned about this 100-to-1 ratio in Professor Lacey's class. And what that meant was you could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. I could have 5 grams of crack cocaine, and we were going to receive the same sentence in prison. And I learned that this disparity was implemented in the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act that also implemented mandatory minimums. What I didn't realize at the time until I started learning more about the law was this disproportionate impact this law had on people of color, Black and brown people in federal prison, to where even today, nearly 70% of people in federal prison for drug offenses are Black and brown people. And that's just a reality that cannot and should not be ignored, because it's not lost on anyone that in the late 80s, more affluent white people were using powder cocaine, and crack cocaine was running rampant through communities of color, in particular Black communities. And so I was writing the paper with Professor David Lacey's guidance, and realizing I need more. I'm missing something in this paper. The law was so heartbreaking, but I was missing the heartbeat. I wanted people in my class, fellow law students, to see how this was impacting real lives. And Professor Lacey encouraged that, and for him to take that time, you know, in our course to really mold and pour into us in a way that was very challenging, because it was perspective shattering.
And that was one of the times I had to pull off the road when you were sharing about those statistics, because I didn't know. And people need to realize that was the reality that happened.
Right.
That information needs to be out there. And so I'm glad you wrote your paper on that and then just kept going. I know it impacted some people that you knew, and that was helpful perhaps to them eventually as you gathered that data. That whole, the effect of the war on drugs there may be many here that don't know because it either is outside of their lifetime or maybe just if you'd like to share more about that particular legislation, it might be.
Yes,
Interesting to
it was a piece of legislation that I learned, again, the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, but I learned or was shocked by how little to no legislative history there was. This law passed extremely fast with not a lot of debate on the floor. You know, it was just mind-boggling to me. And I know Representative Adair, you know, with all that's supposed to go into passing laws, they were going to affect us forever. For a while, you know, there was just not a lot there. There was a high-profile case of collegiate athlete who was going to the NBA, Lynn Bias, who had overdosed. And he actually overdosed freebasing cocaine. And this created this media frenzy of crack being public enemy number one, needing this perpetual punishment and law and order. And it was done in a way where crack cocaine was criminalized and demonized from users to suppliers. And that hit so close to me because my mom was addicted to crack cocaine. And growing up in rural East Texas, you know, a town not much unlike where we are today, it was a childhood friend of mine that had gotten sentenced to life without parole for drugs at 23 years old. But I thought, this is just good old boy, rural East Texas justice. I didn't realize that it was much bigger than my friend Keon Mitchell. And I wanted to include Keon's story in my paper, but I wanted a woman as well because unfortunately, by this time, when I was in law school, my mother had lost control. And she lost control with the battle with addiction that became much stronger than she was, and she went to prison. That was challenging in and of itself because my mom needed rehabilitation. She did not need prison and punishment. And as I started to learn the laws and the theories and see how much we were criminalizing addiction in this country, I wanted much more to talk about the women who were incarcerated. And so I wanted to include a woman in my paper. And I did a Google search. And one late night in the SMU Underwood Law Library, and I think I Googled woman life sentence federal prison, and the case of Sharonda Jones pulled up. And that case changed the trajectory of my life forever. Sharonda Jones was a Black daughter of the rural South, like me, from East Texas. She reminded me so much of myself, except I was a second-year law student at a prestigious private university, and Sharonda was serving her 10th year, a life without parole sentence. And I want to put a pin on that because there is no parole in the federal system. So life without parole means a fundamental death sentence. Sharonda Jones was set to spend the rest of her natural life in prison for her first ever conviction, felony or otherwise, for drugs.
Isn't she like in her 20s?
She was, and it was mind-boggling to me, not because I think people should get off scot-free, and I try to be very clear in that. You know, there are consequences for committing crime. That consequence should not be for Sharonda Jones and many others that they should die in federal prison. Life without parole is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America, only second to the death penalty. And so learning about Sharonda's case and seeing and coming to the realization that she was serving the same amount of time in prison as a Unabomber, I just couldn't make it make sense. And so I wanted to include her story, but her case just tugged at my soul. And so I remember when my mom was in prison, how important mail was. So I sent Sharonda a card and I told her I was a law student. I knew next to nothing about criminal law, that I was going to practice corporate law, but that I was going to get her out of prison. And we formed a relationship from there. And her first response was very nonchalant, like, yeah, right. She wished me well in my studies. And
But at least she heard you.
at
and
least she
met with
heard
you.
me. And I kept writing her, and I went to visit her. She was in prison in Fort Worth at the medical center there. And that began our journey.
And her mom was in the
Yes.
medical facility. and
I
just-
learned from her case, absolutely, that her entire family had gotten arrested in this drug conspiracy case. And there was a sweep of dozens of people a year before Sharonda had even got arrested. And the sweep was all over the news because one of the reserve officers that was part of the arrest was none other than Chuck Norris. And it was during the time the TV show, Texas Ranger was going on, and he was a reserve police officer in Terrell, Texas, and kicked doors in. And so it was something that I was reading like, this is straight out of Hollywood, but these are real people
It really happened.
and real lives. And Sharonda, through cooperation from other people who received lesser sentences in exchange for their testimony, Sharonda Jones opted to utilize her constitutional right to go to trial. And she received what we call a trial penalty. And unfortunately, that decision cost her life.
And you're still in touch with her? Is she still?
Yes, so that
Do you want to
journey.
give away the ending or the outcome?
Well, no, it took us on a remarkable journey. Several years, I graduated law school. I did go to practice corporate finance law. And then I left the law firm. I went in-house and I practiced mergers and acquisitions. And all the while, I was literally moving $1 million deals by day, but by night, I was working pro bono on Sharonda's case. And it was just mind-boggling to me as I tried to get her free, how as lawyers, we are forced to work within the bounds of laws that are outside the bounds of moral consciousness. And I noticed these laws were changing, and I was so excited. I'm like, well, people are getting it. They understand this 100-to-1 ratio should not exist. Members of Congress are speaking out. Judges were speaking out. The Sentencing Commission was changing how we calculated these sentences. But the most heartbreaking part of it for me was none of these changes were retroactive.
So it didn't impact
It
any of the
didn't
people
impact
you were working with?
Sharonda. And it was I'm like, how can someone be serving a life sentence today under yesterday's drug laws? Because to me, if the law is wrong today, it was wrong yesterday. And so we went on this journey of just frustration for me as an attorney, to not have an avenue through the court. And ultimately, our only hope was clemency from the President of the United States. And so I went on that journey to free Sharonda through clemency, and it took 2 years, and I am so grateful. I get emotional every time I think about, that day I got the call that Sharonda Jones would not be dying in prison.
No, one thing that was wonderful,
Thank you.
and she's blessed that you sought her out that day and she listened, and what a
She-
journey, as you mentioned, of your whole career eventually shifted.
Absolutely.
And the legislation was changed, but that still means there's a lot of folks out there that still need some type of assistance or help.
Yes.
And I know it had to be maybe overwhelming at times, but throughout your book, you kind of drew on your faith, and you brought in different pastors or different times when that would provide the strength. But I know just the title of your book, A Knock at Midnight, it comes from a sermon of Martin Luther King Jr. How did that help inspire what you were doing?
Yes, once I was able to free Sharonda Jones, which took 6 years. She served 16 years and 9 months. Her mother, who had been arrested with her, passed away in prison. And once she was free, I said, that's it. This was emotionally draining. I'm going to focus on my career. I love corporate law. I was climbing the corporate ladder, but more calls for justice kept coming. And I took on the case of a man named Corey Jacobs, who, just like Sharonda Jones, was serving life without parole for a federal drug offense out of Virginia. He'd never been in trouble before. He was on his 16th year. And I was just inspired by him and Sharonda because they were so positive and inspiring. And I just thought about this untapped potential this country was missing out on. Right. And also inspired by their resilience and survivorship to be so positive in the face of adversity that would be unbearable for many people. And so Corey became like a mentor to me. He was a guide. I would vent to him about my boardroom corporate world experience and feeling bad that I was venting to a man that was serving life without parole, but he took it in stride. He picked up on all the business concepts I was talking about. And he also began to teach me how to meditate. So Corey was serving life in a maximum security federal prison, and I'm working at a Japanese conglomerate financial services firm called Oryx, and he's teaching me how to meditate. And I went to visit him for the first time, and he was telling me how he'd read that nature could enhance the meditation experience. But he hadn't seen a tree in years because the prison yard where he was housed is surrounded by like a 12-foot concrete wall, and there are no trees on the yard. And Corey's animated, he's charismatic, he's brilliant, and he kept talking in stride. And I don't remember anything else he said during the visit because I could not move past the fact that he had not seen a tree. Wow. A tree. And so I left that visit so empowered. And one, I took in every single tree that I could on my way to the airport, from the trunks to the branches to the leaves. And from there, really looked to him for guidance in ways that is beyond understanding how we connected in that way. And one day after I was working on some clemency cases, and a huge wave of clemency denials came from President Obama. And by this point, I had resigned. I took a leap of faith and resigned from corporate law to follow my passion to transform the system. And I was down. I was just hurt that so many people had been denied and thinking of their loved ones. And Corey Jacobs sent me an email because they can correspond through an intranet system. And he sent me Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sermon, A Knock at Midnight. And he said, listen to this sermon. You need to be nurtured. And I listened to it. And in the sermon, Dr. King uses a parable of a man who's knocking on his neighbor's door at midnight for 3 loaves of bread for a weary traveler. And the man doesn't answer. He keeps knocking. The other man's, like, my children are asleep, and the man keeps knocking. And Dr. King talks about how these 3 loaves of bread are faith, hope, and love. And how the weary traveler who is knocking on his neighbor's door at midnight is merely seeking the dawn. And what was so inspiring about this sermon that brought me out of this dark space was the confirmation from Dr. King in this sermon that the hope that we can hold on to is that the dawn will come. And that is how I titled the book after that sermon. I knew I was going to include that scene in the book. And while I was writing that scene, I listened to the sermon over and over and over and realized that it was the backdrop for our freedom journey. We knocked and knocked and knocked with Sharonda's case and Corey's case. And we're knocking at midnight. No one's answering the door to give us the bread, but we held on to that hope that the dawn would come.
Oh, that's powerful. And I know you mentioned the Obama clemency project, and that obviously went away at the end of his term. And there were a few more successes in the Trump administration. What, do you have any idea of the ones still in motion in the new administration, or is it still too soon to tell?
It's still too soon right now. We're all very hopeful.
Sure.
It was different times under the Trump administration. In my work, however, I don't have the privilege to be partisan. My clients don't care who's in office to let them out. And am grateful that my clients, Alice Johnson, Curtis McDonald, Chris Young, Pharrell Scott, were all granted clemency by President Trump. And I'm hopeful that the new administration reinvigorates the clemency process, where it happens on a regular basis for more people and impacts just a larger scale. So I am hopeful, still hopeful, and we just got to keep on
Just got
stepping.
to keep on. And keeping on, I know the Buried Alive project, you want to speak to, that's in process. now,
Yes,
and-
yes. So the Buried Alive Project is a nonprofit I started with Sharonda Jones and Corey Jacobs. Corey
Yeah.
Jacobs received clemency from President Barack Obama as well. And we started the Buried Alive Project to reach back, to provide pro bono legal representation to other people serving these draconian sentences under these outdated federal drug laws. And to date, we've helped free over 40 men and women who were set to die
Wow.
in prison. And so we are working every day to break chains and reunite more families and restore communities. This utter failure of the war on drugs has impacted many, many lives in many, many ways. And we see it reinventing itself, and from the crack epidemic to now they're treating and sentencing methamphetamine is punished like crack. It's affecting us all. And it's doing it in a way that's not prioritizing the disease of
Root
addiction.
problem. What can we do to help with the advocacy? Are there ways others can be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. One is sharing the message. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people just don't know. And I learned that myself, dealing with Sharonda's case and others. People had no clue that others were set to die in prison under drug laws that aren't even the same anymore. They just weren't retroactive, so definitely sharing the message through education, reading the book, of course, but also I just encourage people to get active in the voting process and ensure we're in voting for people, that have the same interests as we do as it relates to the criminal legal system. But not only that, it doesn't stop there. We have to ensure we hold our elected officials accountable. And I also just encourage anyone to get involved with local organizations doing criminal justice reform work and helping those on the ground here. We are a national organization. We do federal work across the system, but we have clients who come out of Oklahoma, so we're always partnering up, teaming up with people, getting reentry packets together, whether it's toiletries, gift cards, things to help them make their first steps of freedom that much smoother. And so we're always working with people for that. I encourage anyone that's in a position to hire someone with the background, to be background friendly, or if you're in a position to give housing, rental space, to be background friendly or at least empathetic in that way, because reentry is very challenging. And so, I think this is an issue that impacts us all as it relates to transforming the criminal legal system, whether you're looking at it from a moral perspective or an economic perspective. We all have to agree that our system needs transformation.
Thank you. That's very helpful because it gives us all a sense if we could do, I can't be a lawyer, but I can do some of those other things.
Yeah.
Definitely. We may have some questions. I have to look at my phone.
Okay.
We think we figured out this process. Well, I'm sure Peggy has. It's me that. It says, what they want, the question is about Girls Embracing Mothers. Where does that operate? And what kind of support does that provide?
Yes, thank you for that question. That
Mhm.
Girls Embracing Mothers is near and dear to my heart. I started that organization 8 years ago. We operate in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, and we work to empower girls whose mothers are in prison to break the cycle of incarceration and lead successful lives with vision and purpose. And I started that organization after my sister and I experienced the incarceration of our own mother. We partnered with Texas Women's Prisons for the past 8 years for enhanced prison visits. And I'm hopeful to expand. You know, Oklahoma has a very high rate of incarceration when it comes to
Sadly, yes,
women
it does.
per capita. Texas incarcerates more women than any other state in the country by sheer number. And nearly 80% of these women are mothers. Girls Embracing Mothers, I'm hopeful that we amplify the voices of women and girls directly impacted by maternal incarceration to help empower them in a way that, in the way they live their lives, they're creating systemic change. Systemic change does not always have to come from Capitol Hill or state legislators. We create systemic change in the way that we work and interact with other people. And for Girls Embracing Mothers, you know, we have to work to prevent a future generation of women and girls from entering the system. But yes, we're just in Texas for right now. Oklahoma, the Girl Scouts Beyond Bars program is remarkable. We partner with them a lot. They do some very similar work in ensuring that children are connected with their incarcerated mothers. And it's one of the programs when I first started gym 8 years ago that I looked to Oklahoma's program. You know, there's a really remarkable program here, the Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, that's doing some great work.
Thank you. Thank you for that background. Very helpful. Looks like someone else was asking, tell us a little bit more about Chris Young.
Yeah, so Chris Young is a client that I talk about his story in the book. He was arrested at 22 years old and ultimately sentenced to life without parole under the 3 strikes law. Chris had 2 prior drug felonies, so that meant his third one was mandatory life without parole. What people don't realize is that the extent of the priors. Chris Young's first prior, he was 18 for 6 or 7 grams of crack. His second prior, he was 19 for less than 0.5 grams of crack. So his 2 prior drug felonies, the quantity weighed less than 3 pennies. And he was a teenager, no prison time. He gets the third offense and was facing a mandatory life without parole. His sentence was so harsh that even the federal judge in his case expressed heavy judicial reluctance from the bench. He did not want to sentence Chris Young to life without parole. Chris Young gave a speech at his sentencing, like 45 minutes long, that showed this brilliance that was about to be locked away forever. He talked about philosophy and economics and history and what he would do with his life if he were ever to be released, knowing the whole time that the judge's hands were tied. And the judge in the case resigned from the federal bench from a lifetime appointment because of cases like Chris Young, and he began to work with me to help free Chris Young. And the law started to change. The First Step Act of 2018, it changed the 3 strikes law. It's no longer mandatory life. It's mandatory 25 years, which is still a very long time. And your 2 priors have to be serious drug felonies, meaning you had to have gone to prison at least a year, and they had to have occurred within the past 15 years. So neither one of Chris's priors would have
Would have fit that.
qualified. The part that we face again is that provision of the First Step Act is not retroactive. So it got to a point where Chris Young could have been walking out of prison a free man, but the law in its final state was not retroactive. Luckily, we were able to work on a 2255 habeas motion for Chris Young on a very rare issue of ineffective assistance of counsel during plea negotiations. And we won in September. Chris Young's life sentence was reduced to 14 years this past September, and he had about 2 years left. And luckily, on President Trump's final day in office, he commuted the rest of Chris Young's sentence, and Chris Young is free today. Yes.
I'm glad for that question. Anything else you'd like to add? Anything else that I have the yellow note there? Peggy, do we have any other questions? The question was, how could college students get involved within the community?
Oh, yes, definitely. I go back to the reaching out to local grassroots organizations already doing the work. I always say that because criminal justice reform is a hot topic right now. It's popular, it's fashionable, but it still amazes me how little people know about how the system actually works. And there are organizations locally who've been doing this work for a very, very, very long time. Whereas today we see national organizations popping up every day because it's the thing to be doing right now. But I always encourage people to reach out to local organizations on the ground doing the work, especially ones as college students, especially programs that are going inside the prisons. I would encourage everyone to visit a prison. The experience is life-changing. It's perspective shattering. It breaks stigma. I take some of my law school friends or other friends who are execs at corporations in with me to the prisons in Texas, and they all leave changed because, as Brian Stevenson says, we're all much more than the worst thing we've ever done. And they realize that people in prison, most people are not bad people. They just made bad choices. And we all made bad choices. They got caught. And that's something I would strongly encourage, visiting a prison. And there are lots of programs out there where college students are going in and helping people in prison learn how to do resumes or writing or poetry. It's just a way to do something that I feel is critical to driving impactful change. And that is centering the human element. We have to show the heartbeats behind these numbers. The human element is often ignored, but it's critical. It's critical to driving impactful change, and it's the way we all build empathy.
Thank you. Okay. It has been an honor and a pleasure to get to know you better today. And then again, like others, after reading your book, I know you a little bit, your sister Jasmine as well, and you've touched my heart.
Thank
And
you.
as sure many others as well. And I appreciate all your work that you're doing on behalf of others that desperately needed your help.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all and just for listening and listening with an open heart and mind.